Hello everyone, Bladen Breitreiter, incident meteorologist, here with Jasmine to give you a weather update for the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon fires for Wednesday, May 18th. So, we had a very weak backdoor cold front come in off map overnight, turned our winds a little bit to the north up in here, but because it was so weak, we actually didn't see a lot of impacts across the fire perimeter here this morning. So it's kind of like the two different versions of this that we've talked about in the past, where you have some fronts that just kind of are like gentle waves that kind of push in here, they wash over, and then they wash right back out, as opposed to some of the other backdoor fronts that we see come through this area that come in, crash, and that's when we see a lot of those very dramatic, very hard wind shifts with very gusty east winds. So the one we had last night was the former, washing over, kind of muddying up for a little bit, and then receding. We did have some pretty good overnight recovery. Remember that overnight recovery is basically the replenishment of moisture from the super dry afternoons that we have. And so for the majority, we saw things in and around the 40% range, some getting up into the 50% range. Again, that's not super great. Great, I like to see is greater than 60%. I would love to see greater than 80%. That would get into excellent. But regardless of that, compared to where we've been, which has been in the more 20 to 30% range, I'll take 40%. That seems pretty good. So what we're looking at today, we'll walk on over here for a second. So this is our simple water vapor imagery. We've seen this before. So remember, this is basically multiple layers in the atmosphere of water vapor smushed into one image so that we can look at it all in one place as opposed to looking at it in like three. So right now, you can see here we have an upper level low off the coast of Southern California. We have kind of more zonal flow going on across the desert Southwest here, and zonal flow means that we're kind of going like this. And then we kind of have these little short waves, little disturbances that are going to kind of cause things to be a little bit more interesting today as we go into the afternoon hours. The big thing to note, though, is you'll see here we got this green again here. So that is upper level water vapor, very dry underneath. But then as we get into northern New Mexico, you can see that kind of switch over into a more cyan, cerulean sort of persuasion. So these blues are going to kind of suggest that we're seeing water vapor at other levels, and that is partially thanks to the front. It's partially thanks to this disturbance kind of bringing in some of that moisture from the Baja there. And as we go into today, it's going to play a huge role in thunderstorm potential. So temperatures today going to be slightly reduced as we get into the afternoon compared to yesterday, looking at getting into the lower 80s today, looking at near record in and around the Northeast Highlands, but not so much here at Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon. So for the majority, low 80s as stated. And then as we get into the higher terrain, we'll see things get a little bit more into the mid 70s to the upper 70s. Now, your relative humidity minimums going to be pretty reduced again. Even though we have this moisture coming in from the west, we still have a westerly component to our wind. It's going to scour a lot of that out at the surface. So we're still anticipating that we'll see a lot of single-digit relative humidity minimums as we go into the day today, but it'll be improved from yesterday, around 3 to 5%. Winds today, they started out kind of north because of that influence from the front. Then they're going to swap around. They hit east, they hit southeast. And as we go into the afternoon hours, we'll kind of get curved back over into our more typical southwest. Looking a bit elevated, so breezy to locally windy, expecting things to be in that 15 to 20 mile an hour range for sustained winds. And then your gusts are looking to be 28 miles per hour. But they might get a little rambunctious and try to get up to 30, especially when we get into that peak heating of the day. There's a caveat, though. We might see greater wind gusts than that. So the moisture we were talking about, we have the three ingredients that we need for thunderstorms, right? Moisture, instability, and lift. So we have the moisture coming in. We have instability. Remember, instability, best way to think about that is air is tired, just like I am. Air wants to lay down. Air wants to sink. Instability means air wants to rise. The best illustration of this for you that I can think of would be to think of like wintertime stratus clouds. So those are those real thin, real blanket-looking clouds. That would be an indicator of a more stable atmosphere. As we get into summer and you start to see the more poofy cumulus clouds that have a little bit more vertical extent to them, that's an indicator of instability, and it's actually something that we teach firefighters to keep an eye out on when they're out in the field, that if they start seeing those go up, they can expect to have potential impacts to weather and subsequent changes in fire behavior due to that instability. And then there's lift. So we get lift from all the different things we talked about. That's including the shortwave disturbances that we're seeing, the backdoor fronts. Those can act as all different types of lift. Mountains also can act as a form of lift, and that's why we see in the monsoon season so many thunderstorms forming over the high terrain, because it's that added buoyancy that everything gets from those mountains. So, what are we going to see today? Well, if you're down here in the southern zone of the fire, we're not as favored today. Our ingredients in this area aren't quite as good. We don't really have enough energy. We don't really have enough wind shear, which would help things organize and those storms kind of get up and grow up and become real storms. We'll most likely see the majority of our better instability out here beyond I-25. Now, that doesn't mean that for us that we're out of the woods. So what's going to likely happen is this will go for the north zones as well. We'll get those storms initiating off of the high terrain like they like to do out in this country. They'll kind of sit and hang out. You probably, if you've been outside, you've already started to see a field of cumulus clouds, so that's a good indicator that things are starting to get going. They'll hang out there until they push off. Now, I don't anticipate that they're going to push off and become full-fledged adult storms today like what we saw on Monday. It's more likely that they're going to push off, kind of get over here as children. They'll make it a little bit further out, and if they don't catch the better ingredients out here, if they don't have the energy to make it into that more favorable environment, the more likely thing is that they'd get out here, get scared, collapse, and send outflow back this way. So it's a very important thing for us today on the South Zone to be sure that we're keeping in mind of that potential for those gusty and erratic outflow winds that could come from those storms collapsing. Now, getting into the northern zone, I have my handy-dandy sword. You guys are more likely, you're in a better environment. You got more of the moisture is evident from that graphic that I showed. So you guys have a little bit more chance of seeing better coverage and getting those storms kind of in and across branch 20 and into branch 25 and this east zone out here. Again, though, the more favorable environment is going to be as we get into the flatter terrain out here, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to actually see a little bit more development than we would see down here on the South Zone. Now, the biggest question always, how much rain are we going to get? Unfortunately, I don't have such good news in that arena. Just like Monday, we're looking at a very, very dry layer between us and them, in which the rainfall that would start to fall out of that storm is going to go ahead and get back up and go back up into the base of the storm cloud. And what that is called virga, and that's virga with an I. That's right, not an E. I read your Facebook comments. So what that is, it's an evaporative process, so that rainfall makes it a little bit down toward the surface, and then it gets hit by that dry air, it gives up, and it's evaporated back up into the cloud. But what happens is we do get that cold, dense air that is associated with rainfall, it doesn't go back up. It's too dense, so it falls down, and that's where we get a lot of those gusty and erratic winds that aren't necessarily a part of a storm collapse. So we'll see a bit of that today, and as we go into the day today, we can expect that most of that activity will begin to taper off as we get into sunset. So overnight tonight, looking like we're going to still have some above normal temperatures as we go into the evening hours and overnight lows. As we're looking at our overnight humidity recoveries, still looking pretty poor. So it's not, we're going to get some overnight moisture in, or excuse me, daytime moisture in because of the setup that you've seen on the graphic that we looked at a little bit earlier, but we're still not going to be looking at getting into that good or excellent territory. Now, something to talk about the long term. Let's see if I can get rid of my sword. It might fall down. Nope, we're good. All right. So looking into our long term, I'm actually not going to go over to the matrix today. And the reason for that is because it is changing. So the matrix is a situational awareness tool that is internal, used for the team to help them plan for tomorrow and for the next day and what is coming down the pike for them. It is a living document, so it's not something that should be distributed because it's going to change. The moment I see new information, I'm going to make updates to it. So right now, this one that's updated or here from yesterday is already outdated, so we're not even going to look at it. So just keep that in mind when you're seeing those matrices out there, especially if the other Mets on the fires are doing any sort of videos or community meetings. Just know that that data can change, and that data is very point specific. So we have one for each zone on this fire. As we go into the long term, we're looking at Thursday and Friday, another upper level system coming on through, bringing critical fire weather conditions in the form of really exceptionally dry air and further elevated winds. So right now we're looking at between 20 and 30 miles an hour for sustained on Thursday and Friday, and those gusts could be anywhere from 35 to 45 miles per hour. We're continuing to analyze that, and it just keeps changing. So hence the reason I don't want to get you too wrapped up on those numbers out there. Then, with that, we're going to have kind of a series of fronts. We're going to have the Pacific portion of that. We're going to have the backdoor portion of that, most likely. And that's where we're going to see our great reduction in temperatures, getting down into the 70s here across the south zone, getting into the 60s up across the northern zones on, I'm going to have to look at it anyway, Saturday. So anticipate a big change as we start going into the remainder of the week today, as far as temperatures go, and then also changes in winds and wind directions are going to be very crucial as we go into this weekend and to what effects that's going to have across our fire. That's all I have for you guys today. Stay rock and roll out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.